Hello guys, today we will be talking about what if adult Naruto went back in time to his kid body part 4. If you enjoy this video please like and subscribe. Now let's begin. So where are we going? Naruto asked about 10 minutes after leaving Suna. He knew they were looking for Tsunade, he was just hoping Jiraiya would have a good idea where to look. Jiraiya didn't bother turning to him but answered anyway. We're going to find Tsunade, if I remember right, and if you haven't changed it she should be in Bird Country. Most likely in the casino town they have. Jiraiya and Naruto chuckled at the last part. Well, I don't suppose you have a plan to get her to come back? Naruto asked while still smiling at the thought of seeing the slug Sennin. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow and gave him a suspicious look. What do you mean me? You're the one who blew yourself back in time. You've had all this time to come up with a plan. I just got my memories back. Jiraiya said, and they both stopped, realizing neither of them had any plan. Well, like master like student. So, neither of us have a plan, huh? Naruto said in a tone that made it not really a question. They both sighed at the thought. Naruto shrugged and started walking again, Jiraiya keeping pace with him. I guess we'll just wing it then. Bachan wanted to start a medical program, right? At the Sennin's nod, Naruto continued. Well, I'm sure Dad wouldn't have a problem with it, as long as we can find a way to do it, and we could always use her help running the hospital. The blonde finished linking his fingers together behind his head. He was smiling up at the sky as if he didn't have a care in the world. Yeah, well, if it comes to it you could always make a bet with her. Jiraiya told him, snickering as if it was a foolproof plan, which really if you knew her you'd know it was. The little blonde's innocent smile turned into a devious smirk. You know I do miss my necklace. And so the devious little mind set to work. While the Toad Sennin thought, what have I done? Oh well, it'll be fun to watch. In Konoha, up in a tree in the Hyuga compound, sat a young girl with dark hair and the classic Hyuga eyes. Her eyes were slightly different though, but at a glance you would never notice they had a tint of lavender that a certain boy with blonde hair had fallen in love with. Not that the girl knew, no, if she did she wouldn't have been sitting there thinking on what to do about another young girl named Ino Yamanaka, who had flirted with the boy in question the day before. Yes, even at the young age of 7, well almost 8, love was already complicating the next generation of ninja. What do I do? Hinata thought, swinging her feet below the branch she was sitting on. I don't really want to hurt Ino. Well, not much. I think she is still into Sasuke too, but then why would she do that? And in front of him? Could she have been trying to get closer to Sasuke by flirting with Naruto-kun? Would she do that? What am I thinking? Of course she would. Hinata huffed, pursing her lips into a frown. Even if Ino isn't after Naruto-kun though, I can't let something like this happen again. I have to show those stupid fangirls he is mine. But how? I can't just become his girlfriend. I don't even know if he likes me like that. Hinata sighed. If anyone was watching they would probably think it was pretty funny that she kept making faces like she was arguing with herself. Then a look of determination that Naruto would be proud of came onto her face. I'll become a closer friend to Naruto-kun, then I can keep those stupid fangirls away from him and he can get to know me better. Plus I'll get to spend more time with him. Then the thought hit her on the outside and her stomach sunk. But I can hardly talk to him without fainting. Well, I'll just have to. I can't let those girls take him from me. Hinata nodded to herself, the determined look back in place. Now I just have to figure out how. Maybe we could study together, or train. He likes that. Elsewhere in Konoha, Naruto was swinging on a swing at a playground he used to come to the first time he was this age. He had come here to clear his head while he was working on his new memory transfer jutsu. That had been accomplished at least. He was now thinking on how half the kids' parents kept glancing at him, as if wondering if he would attack them any moment. The young boy sighed. Well, I suppose it's still better than last time. At least they haven't grabbed their kids to leave glaring at me. Still, I kinda want to play. No, I'm not a kid anymore. But... Naruto huffed and tried to shake his head at the childish thoughts. The little blonde smiled so big, trying to act happy so that maybe he would be. It was like he was a miniature sun with that smile. Then he started swinging higher like a kid trying to touch the sky. His moment was interrupted though as he heard a voice a bit younger than his own. "Naruto!" Konohamaru called out to the blonde boy on the swing he recognized from a few days ago when the boy saved him from a nasty fall. Naruto took a flying jump off the swing and landed perfectly in it, crouched just in front of Konohamaru. Then stood up smoothly and gave a small one-handed wave. "Yo!" Naruto replied cheerfully, making both his eyes smile like Kakashi would always do. He knew it was juvenile and the younger Konohamaru wouldn't get the joke, but it was still funny as hell. He was laughing on the inside though so nobody would think he'd finally cracked. "Hey!" The younger boy smiled brightly and asked, "You wanna play?" Naruto could see the innocence in his friend, and remembered that his older counterpart had believed in him till the end. In the future, or more accurately now his old world, Naruto had taken Konohamaru on as a kind of apprentice. It wasn't a complete apprenticeship because the boy was a Sarutobi whose clan had been bonded to the monkey summons for generations. "What do you mean?" Then her eyes narrowed. "What did you do to him? And how do you know my name?" The 10-year-old ground out. If Naruto had really been the age he looked, he'd be sweating bullets by now. "Just what I said, I am Gaara's friend, and I helped him by fixing his seal so he can sleep and not be bothered by Shukaku. And I know your name because he told me." Naruto tried answering without going into much detail. Temari paled. You fixed his seal. You're just a kid. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Temari's voice started getting higher. Naruto narrowed his eyes at her. "Quiet." He spoke in a commanding voice, cutting off Temari's rant/mental breakdown. "I may be a child, but I am also a seal master trained by the best. And I worked months on the seal making sure it was perfect for Gaara. I would never have tried it on him if I wasn't sure." Naruto finished with determination almost glowing in his eyes. The way the boy spoke was so straightforward, and sounded so determined that Temari actually found herself believing him. She looked back at her brother seeing him sleep so peacefully, and gave a small smile. "Temari." The girl turned to look at him. "You can't tell anyone. If your father or the council finds out, who knows what they would do to Gaara. Besides, no one can know it was me, at least until we're older and can protect ourselves. Do you understand?" Naruto knew this was it. He had to get her to agree. Temari frowned, her eyes cast down thinking, and then slowly nodded. Naruto let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I understand and I won't tell to protect my brother, but why can't they know it was you?" Temari asked curiously. Naruto didn't answer right away, wondering if he should tell her. She'll find out eventually, but could he trust her now? She just gave him her trust. He looked back up to her and grinned a cheeky fox grin. "Because, I'm the Hokage's son." Naruto told her proudly. He had always wanted to say that. Before Temari could question him further though, he was gone. On the ground outside, Naruto and Jiraiya Shunshin head back to their hotel room. "End flashback so Temari knows?" Gaara asked, as they were swinging together on the swings. "Yeah." Naruto nodded. "Gaara, you know I have to leave tomorrow morning," the little blonde said a bit sadly. "But this way Temari can be with you since I can't. You know she is your friend now too." Naruto smiled at him, as Gaara beamed. Now he has two friends and one is even his sister. Gaara nodded happily, then stopped, showing a bit of panic. "But you'll come back, right?" the little redhead asked. Naruto smiled wide. "Of course. You can't get rid of me that easy." He laughed as his friend sighed in relief and smiled at him. Hokage Tower. Minato sat at his desk, happy he had finally figured out the seal on the scroll he had found. Flashback. Minato sighed quietly and stood to leave before he woke the boy. As he did though, the wooden floorboard under his foot gave a slight creak. He looked at his son's clone to make sure he was still asleep, then bent back down to the board that made the noise. The wooden floorboard was mostly under the bed, but he could see the part he had stepped on and it was lifted up slightly. He tried pulling up on it with his fingers. It was loose, very loose. Using both hands he pulled it up quietly, and even though it was dark he could see a single white scroll inside with a seal on it. The seal master pulled it out carefully, knowing what could happen when some seals were tampered with. Looking the scroll over, he saw that the seal on it had a symbol for fire on it, so it would most likely burst into flames if he opened it. The seal master impressed the seal was a higher level one and he would need time to open it, if he was going to. He was worried about his son though, and if this scroll was important enough for his son to go to such lengths to protect it might tell him how he can help. That was it. His mind was settled. Minato replaced the floorboard and left the room quietly. With the scroll. Flashback. And so after finally disabling the seal, Minato opened the scroll only to see every major event in the last almost 8 years and into the next 10. The young Hokage's eyes were practically glued to the scroll. He read it all the way through, his face changing from happy, sad, angry, confused, to depressed and pissed. Then he read it again. Some of the references were vague, only showing dates and names, but others Minato could tell horrible things could happen, like the Uchiha massacre that could have been much worse than the Chiha incident. After he had read it 3 times he rolled it up and put his hands on his head, taking a few deep breaths. He had no idea how much his son had been changing, or how many truly horrifying things his son had seen and been through in his young life. How can he seem so happy knowing all of this? At this he remembered what Jiraiya had said before he left. Besides, if there is one thing you can count on is that no matter what crazy or impossible thing that kid gets himself into, he always finds a way through it. Minato gave small smile. I hope you're right, sensei. But Naruto won't have to do it himself this time. Soon Naruto and Gaara had met up at the park the next day to play again before Naruto had to leave, because while he'd like to stay a few more days, he and Jiraiya still have to find Tsunade and get back. His new clone wouldn't last forever. Temari caught you? Gaara asked, a little fearful, interrupting Naruto, who was telling him what happened after he passed out. Naruto sighed. Yeah, she seemed pretty upset too. She even attacked me before I could tell her what was going on. Flashback. Who the hell are you? The girl who didn't look more than a few years older than him growled, like a mother bear protecting a cub. Was Naruto's intelligent reply. This wasn't supposed to happen. What do I tell her? I'm screwed. As if proving him right, Temari threw a handful of shuriken at him. He dived to the side, dodging them all. Wait. I'm a friend. Naruto tried to calm her down so he could explain. It was then Temari realized the boy was even younger than her. She glared at him but didn't attack, waiting for an explanation. Naruto sighed in relief. Me and Gaara snuck out earlier, and I was just bringing him back because he passed out. Just as I was leaving, you came in. Naruto made up a partial lie on the spot. However, Temari barely heard anything after he passed out. She whipped her head around, ignoring all basics of ninja training, saying to never take your eyes off the enemy, to see the cutest and most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Her baby brother Gaara was asleep in his bed now, clutching his favorite teddy bear. Temari didn't know whether to coo at him or run in terror. She knew what was said to happen if Gaara ever fell asleep. Naruto was debating if he should knock her out and hope she thought it was just a dream or explain in detail. He really rather just knock her out, but maybe it would be better for Gaara if he had someone when he wasn't there. Temari did just protect him. Naruto groaned mentally, this would be so troublesome. It's okay, Temari, nothing will happen now even when he sleeps. Naruto explained softly. Temari's head whipped back around to the boy who she almost had forgotten was there. I will tell you. But know that if I'm right about what he's hiding, it isn't because he doesn't trust you. It's most likely because he doesn't want you to know the consequences. Minato frowned at the memory and sat up, giving up on sleep for the moment. Because he doesn't want you to know the consequences. The words rung in his head. What consequences? Naruto said, I died in the ceiling. Minato's eyes widened as everything seemed to click into place. The ceiling, he had made his son a Jinchuriki, and hadn't been there to protect him. The consequences, the words rung in his head again. He didn't know what happened, but he knew it had to be pretty bad. If for no other reason than Naruto hadn't said anything about it. The blonde man got up and quietly walked to his son's room. He slipped in without a sound and kneeled down at his son's bedside that his special clone was now in. The boy who could pass as his own clone in a few years looked so peaceful. Minato let a small smile come onto his face and ran his hand softly through the little blonde's hair, carefully as not to wake him. Minato sighed quietly and stood to leave before he woke the boy. As he did though, the wooden floorboard under his foot gave a slight creak. Next day Konoha Naruto was walking toward the academy with Sasuke as usual when they both shivered. They paled and turned to each other. "You feel that?" Sasuke asked in almost a whisper as they picked up the pace. Naruto turned back to watch where he was going but nodded. "Yeah, my fangirl senses are tingling," Naruto answered back ominously. Their eyes searched for the source as they tried to keep their bodies looking relaxed, even though they were ready to sprint the rest of the way to the academy. Just as the academy grounds came into view they ran, as two Garrus, one with pink and one with blonde hair, were running behind them with at least 7 more girls right behind them. Naruto and Sasuke didn't stop running at the gate, they ran right past and to right in front of the academy doors. They quickly turned back to see the fangirls slowing at the gate but still watching them as the fangirls spread out around Academy Training Yard. Sasuke turned to Naruto and they both sighed in relief. That was a close one. Sasuke said as he watched the two-head Sasuke fangirls Ino and Sakura start yelling at each other again. Probably about him. "Yeah, we need to find a new route to take." Again. Naruto sighed the last word, and Sasuke nodded. If nothing else, these rabid girls were helping their stealth training. They both walked over to a tree with no one else near it and plopped down. Everyone was waiting outside till it was closer to when the bell would ring so they all could talk and hang out. With Ino and Sakura, "No way, Ino pig. Sasuke would never like you, because he is in love with me," Sakura yelled, glaring at the blonde girl in front of her, daring her to say it's not true. "Oh yeah, forehead. Well, I am going make Sasuke see how much he likes me, right now," Ino said with conviction. She turned around quickly, letting her ponytail come very close to hitting Sakura in the face, and walked purposefully toward the two boys. Hinata, unnoticed by everyone, was sitting behind tree just turning back to catch quick peeks at Naruto every so often. She had heard the yelling but tuned it out, those two were always fighting. Ino walked right up to the boys, her eyes glancing at Sasuke every few seconds, blushing. "I know how I can make him realize his feelings for me. I'll make him jealous," Ino thought as she stepped right in front of them nervously. Both Sasuke and Naruto raised an eyebrow at her. Hi guys, Naruto, I was wondering if maybe you would go out with me," Ino said the last part so quickly they almost didn't hear it. Naruto's eyes widened a bit but more skeptical than surprised. "Isn't she one of Sasuke's fangirls?" he thought, then turned to Sasuke, who shrugged. Well, I'm actually busy tonight. Maybe another time." Naruto tried to politely turn her down. Even thought the only thing he was actually going to do tonight was work on the memory transfer jutsu. "Oh, well, okay," Ino said, trying to see if her asking out another guy had made Sasuke jealous. She walked away slowly, trying to see a reaction. Meanwhile, Hinata was fuming as she watched the Yamanaka walk away from her Naruto. She knew that the blonde blue-eyed wonder that had captured her heart had a fan club, but most of them kept their distance or were too busy fighting each other over him that they never got close. But that girl had just gone right up and asked him out, her Naruto. Something must be done about this, Hinata thought. In hindsight, Ino's plan worked, it just made the wrong person jealous. Naruto led Gaara with Jiraiya not far behind out of the village through the secret tunnels they always used to get out and play where no one would see them. The tunnels led a good 2 to 3 miles out so that no guards would notice them when they came out the other side. Jiraiya surprised such a tunnel existed, he was the one with a spy network, he should know these things. Oh well, he just remember it in case he needed it in the future. They all arrived at the spot that Naruto had selected previously, without being seen or setting off any alarms. It helped that Gaara knew the village layout. Naruto turned to Gaara when they stopped. "Okay Gaara, this is it, I need you to lay down," Naruto said softly, putting his backpack down as he sat. Gaara knew he wanted this and he trusted Naruto more than anyone, but he was scared. He tried to push his fear down as he sat in front of his friend and slowly lay down on his back. Jiraiya stayed back watching and keeping a lookout just in case someone came. Naruto dug through his backpack and pulled out a brush, ink, and a small book. Gaara watched him pull out each item carefully, still a bit afraid. Naruto opened the little book and turned the pages till he found what he needed. It was his personal book of seals. "Alright Gaara, I need you to take your shirt off," Naruto said, turning to look down at Gaara. He noticed his friend looked nervous. He gave him a small smile. "It's okay Gaara, this won't take too long and after you'll be able to sleep and not have that stupid Tanuki's voice in your head," Naruto said calmly, trying to reassure his friend. Gaara relaxed slightly and nodded, then leaned up to take off his shirt. Naruto picked his book and placed it right beside the redhead, then he hovered one hand over Gaara's stomach and gathered chakra, letting it lightly touch the other boy, making the seal appear. Grabbed his brush with his other hand, Naruto slightly dipped his brush into the ink and after looking back at the seal in the book once more began to copy it. Being very careful to put it in the right place over the first seal and putting each line exactly where it needed to be to connect the two. After about 10 minutes Naruto finished and wiped sweat off his forehead with the back of his head. He sighed, the hard part was done. He looked back and forth from his book, the new seal on his friend, making sure every detail was perfect. It was. Naruto let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. One last thing to do, Naruto thought. "Alright Gaara, we're almost finished. All I have to do is run chakra through the seals, activating the new one and connecting them together," Naruto explained as Gaara listened, giving his full attention. He had mostly relaxed over the time it took to paint the seal. "When I do, it will hurt. It will be over quickly, and don't worry if afterward you fall asleep," Naruto finished explaining. Gaara gulped but nodded. This would let him sleep, and not hear voices anymore. Naruto took a deep breath and let it out slow as Jiraiya turned back to watch. He put both hands over the seal and pushed his chakra into the new seal first, letting it flow from it into the old seal, connecting them. Gaara felt a surge of pain from the seal and he clamped his teeth as all his muscles tightened. It felt like it was being burned into his skin, which he realized that was exactly what was happening. He had never felt physical pain thanks to his sand always protecting him, and Jinchuriki or not, he was only 7 years old. Gaara couldn't take it any longer, he screamed. The young blonde flinched at hearing his friend scream. He had never heard Gaara scream in any world. Thankfully Jiraiya had enough sense to put up a silencing barrier. He felt like crap though, being the one that had given his friend such pain, but it was almost done, just a few more seconds. There. Gaara and Naruto both panted after it was finished, completely exhausted. One from having a seal burned into him and the other from using a lot of chakra and the control of only using his. Who knows what would happen if Kyuubi's chakra got into Shukaku's seal. Naruto looked up when Jiraiya came over and put a hand on his shoulder. It seemed Gaara had passed out. The blonde smiled at his godfather though. He had done it, he had fixed Gaara's seal. The little blonde took a deep breath and stood putting his things back into his backpack. Naruto bent down and struggled to pull Gaara, who was just as heavy as himself, onto his back. "I can get him." Jiraiya tried to take Gaara off him, but Naruto shifted his friend to a better spot and refused. "I got him," Naruto told the Sennin. He wanted to be the one to bring Gaara back. He wasn't sure why, he just wanted to make sure his friend was safe. So together they snuck back into Suna's walls and to Gaara's window. Naruto had gotten in as before without too much trouble despite the extra 50 to 60 pounds on his back, and laid the little redhead in his bed. After he hesitated, leaving his friend there not knowing what happened. Just then the door to Gaara's room opened. "Gaara?" A blonde girl stood in the doorway, her face changing from blank curiosity to anger when she saw him. "Who the hell are you?" The girl, who didn't look more than a few years older than him, growled, like a mother bear protecting a cub. In Konoha it was later at night as Minato turned over to his other side again. He just couldn't sleep. He had been having trouble sleep ever since Jiraiya and the real Naruto left. But it wasn't just his worry for his son that was bothering him, it was what Jiraiya said just before he left. "What do you mean, Iu?" The Sennin smiled sweetly, looking every bit ready to kill him. Naruto laughed nervously, sweating. "No offense, but my dad's mine, and I'm not sharing." Naruto relaxed a little when the Sennin no longer looked ready to put him through a wall. He knew what he said was selfish, but after his first life he just wasn't ready to let go and share his father's attention with anyone. Maybe in a few years he would, but that could wait. I just want you to meet him, and tell him how I got the necklace. Naruto said like he had already won it. Tsunade caught the cocky remark but didn't comment on it. She nodded her head and looked at betting. It was enough to buy a really nice house. The legendary sucker smirked. How much the boy was? It's a bet, kid, she stated as the boy smirked back at her. With Hinata and Naruto, Kitsune clone Hinata woke up feeling very content, like she just didn't want to move. As she became more alert, she started to realize her pillow was moving, no breathing. Her heart almost stopped in fear, thinking she was close to a wild animal or worse, a kidnapper. She tried to not move so that the person that she now knew was human because of the arm she felt around her waist didn't know she was awake. Hinata started to relax as she remembered the last thing that happened before she fell asleep, which was Naruto Namake's beautiful eyes. However, that made her nervous almost as much as it made her happy. Now though she had to know, so Hinata slowly cracked her eyes so that they were barely open, just enough for her to see the orange lining of a black jacket that had been placed around her shoulders. A jacket that she knew was her Naruto's? Hinata smiled, deciding that faking sleep a little longer wouldn't hurt, and let her eyes close completely again. The little blonde time traveler smirked as he felt his Hime wake up and then try and fake sleep. He would have said something, but seeing that perfect smile grace her lips made him content to just watch her a little longer. He wouldn't get another moment like this for a while after all. Sasuke was looking for Naruto since they usually did spend the weekend together. He had already checked the blonde's house, the ramen stand and the top of the Hokage monument where he knew his friend liked to think. Even though no one was supposed to go up there. Of course, when he said so, his friend gave him one of those answers that amused him and made him want to slap his forehead. He said that's why it's the best place to think. And while Sasuke saw the logic that no one would bother him there, it also scared him to think he might be starting to understand the mind of Naruto Namake's. Now Sasuke was checking the training grounds that he and Naruto used the most, Training Ground 7. There was no active Team 7, so it was always empty. The young raven walked casually through the grounds looking for his friend. Within a few minutes he spotted him up in a tree, holding a girl. Sasuke's face went slack as his eyes grew slightly wide. He put his Uchiha/bored out of my mind look back on his face as he saw his friend grinning at him like he was trying not to laugh. Naruto put one finger to his lips as Sasuke frowned and raised a questioning eyebrow at the blonde still holding on to who he now recognized as Hinata Hyuga. The least annoying girl in their class, in his opinion. Naruto just shook his head slowly so that the giri in his arms didn't try and see what was going on. The blonde made a waving motion with his free hand to Sasuke in mouth later. The young Uchiha rolled his eyes and turned, walking back the way he came, but Naruto was sure he caught an amused smirk before he left. Sasuke's smirk turned a bit more devious by the time he got back out of the training grounds. Now he knew exactly what he was going to get his friend for his upcoming 8th birthday. Yes, now he just had to figure out how to get it without getting caught. Bird Country, gambling house with Naruto and Tsunade. The slug Sannin couldn't believe it. Not only had the kid beaten her, no, utterly crushed her and everyone else had eyes, but after she had given him the necklace and asked where his father was to meet him. The kid had smiled so innocently, telling her Konoha. That's when she told him there was no way in hell she was going there. And that's when everything went straight down the crapper. The boy didn't even look fazed as she broke their deal, or at least she thought she had. The boy, who was now wearing her cursed necklace, simply stated, a deal's a deal. Then she spotted her old teammate behind him looking right at her. He was smirking the same way as the blonde boy. The legendary sucker knew then not only had she lost, but she had been conned by a 7-year-old boy, who apparently had the muscle, so to speak, to back him up. Not that she was going back there without a fight. No, she swore she would never go back, and she was defiantly not going back because of some stupid bet. When she got up to make a tactical retreat though, well, she didn't make it very far. The slug Sannin's last thoughts before blacking out was, how in the hell did that brat slip something in my drink? Naruto jumped up into the tree on a branch above the beautiful little Hyuga so quietly she never noticed. The large grin never left his face as Naruto prepared his little prank. He stepped quietly upside down beside the girl on the branch above her squatting. Now that he was in the right spot, Naruto was trying not to laugh before he stood up quickly upside down on the branch and yelled, "Hi Hinata-chan." Hinata jumped and looked up quickly to the one who had scarred her with wide eyes only to find herself inches from the face of the boy she was just thinking about. She stared in shock for a second, looking into those beautiful blue orbs that looked as pure and as free as the sky, with a mischievous glint that he didn't seem to bother to hide. Hinata started to smile before she realized how close their faces were. She was bright red in 3 seconds flat. She tried to back up or say something, but it was like her brain was frozen. Then everything started to go dark. The last thing she saw was her crush jumping down, hopefully to catch her. Naruto smiled contentedly as he watched the girl he loved so much stare into his eyes. He remembered one time in another life she told him when she looked into his eyes she saw freedom and strength, and he couldn't help but wonder if this younger Hinata was seeing that too. He almost rolled his eyes as he saw the early signs of her fainting, but that had been what he was going for. The blonde boy smirked as he quickly jumped down to her branch and caught his princess. He sat down in the crook of the tree and pulled her back to his chest, sighing happily as he carefully slid her hair out of her face. Naruto smiled at the girl. He knew this was cheating, that he shouldn't have tried to make her faint just to hold her. But when he saw her smile softly and nuzzle her cheek into his chest, he just couldn't bring himself to care. With the real Naruto and Tsunade growled as she lost again, but not just because she lost, no, she lost all the time. She was pissed because she could figure out just how the damn brat kept winning. It wasn't just her, the kid was beating everyone. She didn't even think he had lost once. Finally, after 4 hours, the legendary sucker had nothing left to bet and the other players had left an hour ago grumbling about lucky brats. As she started to get up to leave, the boy grabbed her hand, stopping her. Tsunade shook her hand, making the boy let go. "Where are you going, Ba-chan?" the cute little blonde asked, looking up at her from the ground. Tsunade spun around and glared at him. "I'm not old Gaki." She kept up her glare, daring him to say otherwise, but the boy didn't even flinch, just waiting for her to answer. Tsunade sighed. "And you already won everything, there's nothing left to bet." The boy smirked. This is what he had been waiting for. "Actually, I have a bet for you," Naruto said while smirking at the legendary sucker. Tsunade eyed his cautiously, her inner gambler urging her on as her ninja instincts were screaming trap. Needless to say, the gambler sighed one out. "Oh, and what would that be?" Tsunade asked. Naruto's smirk widened. Hook, line and sinker, he thought. "I will bet you everything I won tonight on this next game, if you bet me that necklace and one favor," Naruto stated confidently. Tsunade frowned at him. "What favor? And why would a little kid want my necklace?" She decided to voice such thoughts to the grinning boy who already looked like he won. "Why do you want my necklace? And what favor?" Tsunade asked suspiciously. She was beginning to think the kid was smarter than any kid should be. The kid didn't look intimidated at all, actually he looked a little excited. Naruto just smirked back at her again. "I want that necklace because it was the first Hokage's," Naruto said, standing up. "And to be Hokage, that is my dream." Naruto stared up at her, grinning. Tsunade saw the determined look in the boy's eyes. That same damn look, she thought, as the faces of her little brother and first real love flashed in her mind as they said the same exact words to her so long ago. Tsunade closed her eyes and smirked. It was already decided she never had bet the necklace before, but that boy, she would bet it to him. "And the favor?" Tsunade asked again. Naruto laughed, throwing his hand behind him to the back of his head enviously. "Oh, nothing major," he started, trying to seem casual. "I just want you to meet my father," Naruto said, smiling innocently at her. Tsunade arched an eyebrow. "That's it? There must be a catch." "Wait a minute, he doesn't mean as a date, right? You mean like a date?" the Sannin practically screamed. Naruto blanched. "No. You!" the little blonde yelled back almost as loud. Tsunade glared dangerously. Naruto walked into the gambling house and quickly saw who he was looking for, a blonde woman with brown eyes, a large bust looking to be in her late 20s, even though he knew she wasn't, sat in front of a cup and a pair of dice. Of course there was also a very nervous manager sweating close by. He couldn't help but smile, almost laughing at the familiar scene he hadn't been able to see since he got his new life. The little blonde walked over to her like he didn't know she just threw a man through the wall. And across the market street, standing beside where she sat, he was smirking while ignoring the manager, who was nervously waving his hands trying to warn him not to go near the legendary sucker. "Well, I guess you're down one player. Mind if I sit in?" Naruto asked in his most time an innocent little kid let me play too voice. The question was directed to the group that had two other players left, but he was looking at Tsunade. She smirked at him and spoke for the group that wasn't too likely to oppose her after that last display. "Sure kid, if you got money. We're playing evens and odds, you know how to play?" Tsunade asked, see what she thought might be easy prey. Naruto just smiled sweetly at her. "Yep. I think so. That's where you roll the dice and call even or odd, bet on the right one and you win. Right?" he asked, sitting down beside her, looking for all the world he needed her to assure him he was right. She just nodded, smirking a little at how naive he seemed. She almost felt bad about taking his money. "Almost? That's right," she replied. Naruto smirked and thought stage 1 complete. And that's how the beginning of plan to bring Tsunade back started. In Konoha with Minato and Clone. Naruto, I found this in your room," Minato said, sitting Naruto on his desk in the Hokage's office and pulling out the scroll with future events written on it. First Naruto paled as seeing the scroll, then frowned, thinking at least it didn't end up in the hands of an enemy. "Can you tell me about this?" Minato asked carefully, trying to keep his tone neutral. The soon-to-be 8-year-old gave him a dead look. "I call that an invasion of privacy." There was no anger in the younger blonde's voice, but defiantly some annoyance. Minato rolled his eyes. Yes, he felt a little bad about taking it, and reading some magazine a kid shouldn't have. This was possible fate of the world kind of stuff. He looked pointedly at his son to give an explanation. Without asking, but this wasn't his finding, Naruto sighed. "I guess you already read it. That is my list of things from my own timeline and this one. Mostly things I have changed in this one and whatever I can remember about major events from the other one." "And why didn't you show me this or tell me about this stuff?" asked Minato. He noticed his son kept looking right at him. Not uncomfortable or ashamed, he had hidden it. Because the more people that know, the more things will change. Half or maybe even none of the things on that list will ever happen, or maybe they all will. But now that you know, even if you don't mean to, your decisions may change based on a believed outcome that may never happen, or could even make one of the things on that list happen, or something even worse. There are endless possibilities. They were both quiet for a while, thinking over all the annoying complexities of time travel. Finally Minato sighed, pushing the thoughts away before his brain exploded. "I understand, Naruto, but I want you to come to me if you need any help. You don't need to do everything on your own," the older blonde stated, looking directly at his son. Naruto looked back at him, his eyes a bit wider than usual, then smiled. "That's right, I'm not on my own anymore. If you need anything, just come to me, promise?" his father asked. Naruto, still smiling, slightly nodded at him. "Promise," the young seal master stated, getting up and heading out, but before he got far his father called again. "Oh, and Naruto, keep me in the loop with the things you're doing. I'd like to know the amount of destruction so I have a good explanation before I have to answer the council's questions." Minato smirked as he tossed the timeline scroll to his son. Naruto smirked back and bit his thumb, resetting the destruction seal with his blood on the scroll within seconds as he walked out the door. With Hinata hid in a tree, patiently waiting in one of Naruto's favorite training grounds for him to show up. Trying to picture herself going to talk to him, she was nervous beyond all known reason just thinking about it. Her heart would speed up, and every few minutes she had to force herself to take a few deep slow breaths to calm down. She had even tried talking herself out of going to talk to him a few times, but at the thought of Ino flirting with him she became steeled to where she was, continuing to wait. She had to become his friend. If she could do that, then it would be easier to keep other girls away from him. Plus, as his friend, she would get to spend more time with him and he would get to know her better, so maybe he'd start to like her as more than a friend. But first she had to stop being so childish and talk to him. Granted, she still was a child, but that made no difference. She couldn't wait till she wasn't while some other Giri moved in on him. As Hinata was lost in her thoughts, she missed when Naruto had arrived, but he saw her. Naruto grinned widely as he spotted his Hime in a tree, looking like she was deep in thought. Now usually he would just pretend to not notice her and let her watch him train, but he really wanted to see her. Lately his heart had been aching to hold her in his arms like he used to do whenever they could find a moment of peace. As Kakashi finished giving his report, he just had to ask, "Sensei, how is Naruto doing?" Minato blinked. He didn't realize his student would miss Naruto. He hadn't been sending Kakashi to protect his son because, well, it was just a clone. But it might be causing suspicion. "Ah, yes, Kakashi, he's doing welly. After you've rested from this mission, maybe tomorrow you would look after him?" Minato smiled as Kakashi nodded. "Of course, sensei." The silver-haired scarecrow agreed, then puffed into smoke. Before even a few seconds passed, though, Minato's paperwork, was interrupted again. Not that he wasn't grateful. He even smiled when he saw what interrupted him was a little orange and black blur coming from the doorway. "Dad!" Naruto called as he tackled his father. Minato vaguely wondered how a clone could take such a hit and not pop. Before he remembered what he wanted to talk to his son about. Pulling the boy back and sitting him on the desk in front of him, Minato prepared to ask about something he wasn't sure he should really ever know about, the future. With Naruto and Jiraiya, Naruto followed Jiraiya right through the gate that said they had entered Bird Country. Tsunade wasn't far, he was sure, but they went to get a room at the inn first. Then they would restart their search for the Slug Sennin. Jiraiya was excited to see his old teammate but apprehensive too. Naruto knew why. One night about a week after Jiraiya's death, Shizune asked him to find the Godame. He had found Tsunade at a bar getting drunk. After a while he got her to talk to him. She told him about how she was going to go out with Jiraiya if he came back, and the bet she made with him. He had led her out of the bar that day and dragged her to her bed, feeling more guilty than ever for yelling at her over Jiraiya's death. He didn't say anything to the now alive Jiraiya about it, and he wasn't going to unless he had to. They both headed out of the hotel and split up. Jiraiya went to check the bars, and baths of course, while Naruto went to check all the gambling houses. "Wow!" Naruto said in a bit of awe, when he saw how many and how big all the places in the gambling section of town was. Somewhere in the back of his mind he was thinking it only looked that way because he was so small, but he ignored that thought as it would take the magical effect away. The little blonde had his hands in the pockets of his black shorts, walking around in a burnt orange shirt with his head held up high like he owned the place. Soon after he had gone into and searched for gambling spots, he was walking down the street again and someone went flying right in front of him. From the wall. Naruto's sweat dropped when he heard a familiar voice coming from the hole in the wall where the now unconscious man just came from. "Ah, yes, I've found Ba-chan, now to put the plan into action," Naruto thought with a smirk, after he shook his head at the poor unfortunate soul on the ground that had annoyed his Ba-chan. The little blonde stepped over the rubble and went inside, smiling to himself. If all went according to plan, the one he made up on the way there, it would be all too easy to get his Ba-chan to come back to Konoha. Of course Konohamaru would have probably signed the Toad contract instead if Naruto had asked him to, but he wouldn't take that away from the boy. However, Naruto did teach Konohamaru many things, from those perverted jutsu from when he was a kid to his own nindo, and even one of the few family jutsu Naruto had, the Rasengan. Not that he knew it was a family jutsu at the time. Even if he did though, he would have still taught it to the boy, because Konohamaru was more than just some kid he was teaching, he was his little brother in all but blood. "Sure!" Naruto exclaimed excitedly. Even if those that didn't like him before was still afraid of him, there were many he still had. Mentally he thanked his little brother for lifting his spirits and reminding him he wasn't alone. Minato's office, Hokage Tower. Kakashi walked in to give his report on the mission he just finished. While he was giving the report though, he was wondering why he hadn't been assigned to look after Naruto in a while. It was really starting to bug him because he was the one that was always called in to watch over the boy after he would ditch his Anbu guards or there was some added danger. His sensei would do so of course because he trusted Kakashi more than his other shinobi. He even had Kakashi watching Naruto since he was still very small. Flashback: Kakashi couldn't believe it, his sensei was ordering him on a mission to babysit. He may have been 16 years old, but he was a jounin, for crying out loud. Okay, yes, the kid was important and even more so to his sensei, but this just wasn't fair. Hokage's son or not, he did not want to babysit a 2-year-old, even if he was already potty trained. However, even as he was mentally cursing his luck, Kakashi was walking to his sensei's house to do the mission. He got to the door, and before he could knock, a blonde chibi version of his sensei opened it up. The chibi smiled at him and opened the door wider for him to come in. While he had never had to babysit the boy before, he knew the little blonde fairly well, seeing him in the Hokage office a lot, so the chibi seemed comfortable staying with him. And for that he was glad. The last thing he needed was a screaming 2-year-old wanting no one but his daddy. "Daddy!" Naruto yelled into the house as he led Kakashi inside. "He's here!" he called. Then the blonde little bundle of sunshine shot off deeper into the house, not bothering to check if the teen Kakashi was following. The still annoyed silver-haired teen waited where he'd been left, but he didn't have to wait long. In less than a minute his sensei came out sporting a bright smile as he carried Naruto. "Hey Kakashi, thanks for doing this. I really feel better knowing that you're with him," Minato said easily, like his student had a choice. Not that Kakashi would complain out loud about it. Now though he felt a little guilty. Naruto was his sensei's son and did have a high kidnapping potential. So Kakashi sighed, resigned to his fate. When no one was looking, Naruto smirked. "He's already annoyed he has to watch me. Just wait until I'm done with him. He will regret the day he ever used 1,000 years of pain jutsu on me. Mahahahaha. Okay, yes, he doesn't actually remember that and hasn't actually done it. Boo you, but he's still gonna pay." On the outside, Kakashi was getting a bit nervous at the look on Naruto's face that clearly any 2-year-old shouldn't have. "How long will you be gone again, sensei?" the boy asked, hoping it was sooner than he remembered. Minato rolled his eyes at his student but answered him anyway. "Just until tomorrow morning. Don't worry, you'll do fine. Just remember to feed him dinner, and put him to bed around 9. Minato told him, then stopped looking a little panicked. "And don't let him put anything in his mouth he shouldn't." Then Minato let his son slid down him and kneeled before the 2-year-old, holding on to his arms gently. "You be good for Kakashi, okay Naru-chan?" Minato asked, told his son. Naruto's sweat dropped. He had no intention of doing that, so he crossed his fingers behind his back and nodded. Then he jumped up to hug his dad to draw attention away from that subject. "I'll miss you, Daddy." The cute 2-year-old squealed as he let go. "I'll miss you too, Naru-chan," Minato said, hugging him back. With that, the Hokage was out the door, not to be seen till morning. Kakashi turned back to his charge, who had started openly smirking with a gleam in his eye the teen didn't like as soon as the front door had shut. Flashback: and that night became what Kakashi had taken to calling the night from hell. When Minato-sensei had come back in the morning, Kakashi was on the floor, out cold and covered in orange paint, rotten eggs, garbage, some kind of green goo neither could identify, and a black eye. While a blonde 2-year-old was sleeping peacefully in his big boy bed without one hair out of place, his toys weren't even on the floor. The silver-haired Cyclops never knew exactly what happened that night. He thought he remembered something about a possessed baby and the evil laundry bunnies, but he was sure that was just a dream. Afterward, though, nothing weird ever seemed to happen when he watched Naruto and they became fairly close, like the first time never happened at all, except when his sensei teased him about it, of course. The little blonde rolled his eyes, still unable to fully wipe the grin off his face. He wasn't just trying to freak him out, but his old sensei just had to leave a mark that would last long enough for his father to see. "Oh well, I guess I'll just have to play innocent," Naruto thought as he made a few clones to clean up the mess, except whatever was on Kakashi. Then went down himself to grab some food and drag his babysitter, by whatever part of him not covered in something, to the living room, where at least he would be asleep on the carpet instead of tile. He would have tried to get him on the couch, but with how small he was it would have been troublesome, and it would have gotten the couch dirty. The boy then made his way to his big boy bed already in his pajamas and settled in. Lucky for him, the next day it seemed that when Kakashi hit his head he didn't just get a black eye but didn't remember what had happened the whole night. Naruto grinned as wide as a Cheshire cat when he heard. Of course they tried to ask him what happened but he just shrugged and said he was sleeping. Not that Minato didn't still suspect him, but there was no proof and he was too therefore innocent. Jiraiya had laid his godson down quickly and crushed the last remaining enemy Jounin's skull with one chakra-enhanced punch, sending what was left into the ground. Then jumped back to the boy laying on the ground. Shizune was looking him over since Tsunade was now shaking at the blood covering his godson's shirt and coat. Shizune stopped and shook her head at Jiraiya. She couldn't do any more. The kunai had hit too close to his heart. She didn't have the experience. The Toad Sage looked up desperately at Tsunade, but the older medic seemed to be in her own world, and he looked back down to the boy in front of him who had come so far. Just to die now? No. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed as he stood up and grabbed Tsunade. Snap out of it. If you don't do something he'll die, he yelled as he shook her. The Slug Senin's eyes snapped to him when she heard the word die, and she looked down at the boy, her eyes widening as she saw her cursed necklace on him. Please. Jiraiya begged her, now showing his desperation. Tsunade wordlessly pulled out of her old teammate's grip and knelt down in front of the blood-covered boy, and her eyes narrowed. No. This boy wouldn't die wearing this necklace. No, if I have anything to do with it. Her hands started to grow green over the boy's chest and she pulled the kunai out, carefully sewing up and healing as much of the damage that it had caused as she could. A few minutes later she was done and sweating, but was a bit confused. It wasn't easy, but it had been much easier than it should have been to heal the boy, almost as though he was healing 30 times faster than normal. When his chest was mostly healed she heard Jiraiya let out a breath of relief when, even without much medical knowledge, he noticed. Not for the first time that day she wondered just exactly who was this boy. Being curious she went back to the young boy's brain and was shocked to find out somehow his mind was back to normal minus the enlarged long-term memory. Even if his mind had won through the information already, there should have been some bruising or a more tender spot on the part of his brain that processed the information. Tsunade's side was just another thing she need to ask. Kakashi's babysitting make part 2 halves. Once Naruto had managed to mostly stop laughing, he got up and stepped around the teenage Kakashi. He went to his room and grabbed the paint-filled water balloons he had made specifically for today. Then the 2-year-old little monster ran to and through the kitchen and laundry room setting up his plan. It all didn't take more than 10 minutes, and he ran back to the still unconscious Kakashi in the living room. The toddler smirked before taking a few steps back and throwing one of his water paint balloons right in the middle of the young Jounin's vest. The teenager instinctively jumped to his feet at the impact, looking for some clue to what was going on. In his confusion though, Naruto had managed to hit him with 3 most paint balloons as he ran away, chuckling to himself. Kakashi's eyes narrowed and he noticed that he wasn't just hit by water balloons because he was covered in orange paint. Naruto! The young Jounin yelled as he ran after the toddler. He didn't know how the kid had pulled off the possessed act, but he knew the brat did it, and now he looked like the child's canvas. The teenager ran into the kitchen after Naruto and was surprised as he had to jump up to avoid a tripwire, but his eyes widened as he realized that now he couldn't stop himself from falling into the garbage can. He fell right on it and its contents fell out on top of him. With the still wet paint on him, a lot of the trash was now sticking to him. Naruto laughed from the other side of the kitchen as Kakashi leaned against the cabinets. The Jounin gritted his teeth. This was ridiculous. He was a Jounin, and the kid was 2 for Kami's sake. Sensei's son or not, the brat wasn't getting away with this, thought Kakashi as he got up, now slowly stalking his charge. The toddler stopped laughing as he felt Kakashi approaching and grew nervous when he saw his babysitter didn't look too pleased. The little blonde dashed to the laundry room as fast as he could and made it in before Kakashi could catch him. The pissed-off Jounin was right behind him though, and it was a dead end. The toddler was at the other side of the small room against the wall looking scared. When Kakashi saw him like that, he lost some of his steam and walked into the room, just to have a pail fall onto his head, spilling some kind of green goo on him. The teenage Kakashi shivered as he felt some go down the back of his shirt. He noticed Naruto look up from where he had been cowering and smirk at him. The little monster had planned it. Oh yes, the kid would pay for this. Just before the teenage ninja could start plotting the boy's untimely punishment, said boy poofed into a puff of smoke. Kakashi had just enough time to think a clone? Before he was hit in the back of the head with an egg, which followed the goo in going down the back of his shirt. Kakashi was really getting tired of this. He spun around only to see his charge throw the rest of the carton of eggs at him. He jumped back, but he was still in the laundry room and it was small, so he only got back far enough that they hit his pants instead of his face. The teen plopped down on the ground as the small boy that was causing him so much trouble ran away giggling. Kakashi sighed as he sat there, no longer feeling quite as angry as he was feeling stupid for being outwitted by a kid barely out of diapers. Granted, he had underestimated the kid, but still his was sitting covered in stuff on the floor and feeling very sticky. The boy sighed again as he got up and took a look in the dryer, thinking there was maybe something he could change into that was clean in it. That was a mistake. As soon as he opened it, a herd on bunny-shaped clothes stampeded him. Shirts, pants, even underwear seemed to be folded into bunnies, and had come alive. What the hell is going on? It's like the whole freaking house is haunted. Kakashi mentally screamed as he wept anime style and tried in vain to dispel it as a genjutsu. Naruto cackled in his room as the memories from his clones came to him. The only thing he felt bad about was when his babysitter hit his head close to his good eye when he fainted. Again, from an overload of anxiety, fear, frustration, confusion and a fair variety of mental stress, the enemy ninja decided to stand their ground and both took a fighting stance. He may have taken out their Chunin level partners, but they were both at Jounin level. Naruto made a familiar hand sign and within a second the Jounin were surrounded by about 100 identical 7-year-old boys. That's not what was worrying the Jounins that were now back to back. No, it was the sadistic grin on all of the young boys' faces as they paired off in groups of 4, only leaving about 10 in one group. The real one had mixed in with the clones, and the enemy was even more aggravated that they seemed to be being played with by a child. Not that they had much time to dwell on it as the group of 10 clones charged, splitting them apart. Meanwhile, Jiraiya felt Tsunade start to stir on his back and grimaced, knowing she would most likely pummel him when she comes to. Shizune was too busy staring at the fighting to take any notice though. Unknown to any of them, the slug Sannin had come to about a minute before and had just been pretending to still be out so she could know what was happening. She noticed she was on her old teammate's back first, so she knew she was most likely safe and was about to hit him and jump off, when she saw him. The brat that had tricked her, she was again about to whack her teammate and then go and teach the kid a thing or two when she saw him perform a Jounin level forbidden jutsu, on a high scale. Seeing a kid perform such a technique so effortlessly stopped her from moving long enough to catch a glimpse of the necklace on the boy, the one he won from her. She had only bet it because of what he said, and how he said it. "I want the necklace because it was the first Hokage's," Naruto said, standing up, "and to be Hokage, that is my dream." Naruto stared up at her grinning. Tsunade saw the determined look in the boy's eyes. That same damn look, she thought, as the faces of her little brother and first real love flashed in her mind as they said the same exact words to her so long ago. Tsunade sighed quietly. She would keep her promise to him. But that didn't mean she was going to make it easy after they tricked her. The legendary Sannin, well known for her strength, raised her fist carefully over her old teammate's head not to alert him, then brought it down hard as she jumped off his back. Shizune leaped loudly as she jumped away from the exploding ground. Naruto and all his clones sweat dropped, thinking the same thing. Botch hands up. But didn't turn away from the enemy. They of course did look, and Naruto made their moments lapse of concentration into his advantage. 2 of the remaining groups of 4 clones charged, one group going to each ninja. By the time either of the Jounin looked back to their opponent, they were kicked into the air, then they were each kicked 4 more times mid-air and thought they would be kicked into the ground. Instead, the boy jumping above them held his hand back and then suddenly shoved it forward with a spinning blue ball into each of their stomachs. The 2 Jounins spun with the force and hit the ground simultaneously, each in a crater as big as the one Tsunade just put Jiraiya in. It was safe to say they weren't getting up anytime soon, and when they did get up they wouldn't be moving very quickly with as many bones that were broken. Naruto grinned happily at his work, then turned to see his Shizu crawling out of a crater that Tsunade was standing near with her arms crossed, switching between glaring at him and Jiraiya. Then Naruto felt extreme pain in his head and knew his Fox Shadow clone had just dispelled. The rest of his normal clones dispelled as he clutched his head, gripping his hair, and fell to his knees, biting the inside of his cheek to keep himself from moaning. Jiraiya noticed him go down and rushed to him as if he hadn't just been smashed into the ground. Tsunade and Shizune followed. Being Metexla the younger stayed back to give her Shizu room. "Naruto, hey kid, what happened?" Jiraiya tried asking as he supported the little blonde with his arm to sit up. Naruto's face screwed up, trying to think enough through the pain in his head to answer. With his hands still gripping his hair tightly, he groaned, curling closer to Jiraiya. "Clone." The little blonde finally managed to mumble just when Jiraiya thought he wasn't going to answer. Jiraiya grimaced and Tsunade saw anger, fear and concern flash through the other Sanin's eyes. She sighed and knelt down to the boy, her hands glowing green as she used a diagnostic jutsu to check him over. The older Toad Sage didn't move, trying to keep his godson still, hoping there might be something his old teammate could do. Tsunade was considered the best medical ninja in all the elemental nations and had seen many things, but when she got to the young boy's head she gaped. His mind seemed to be in overdrive, like it was trying to process a large amount of information. The chakra in his brain was fluctuating wildly. She immediately tried to calm it. Slowly it was slowing down to a more normal level, but as her chakra was wrapped around his brain she noticed the part of the boy's brain where his memories were supposed to be was much larger than it should be for a young boy. Actually it was almost the size of an adult's, but for a kid to have that many memories was impossible, unless he remembered every single thing that ever happened to him in detail, and even then it was pushing logic. The medic pushed her thought away as the little boy's pain seemed to have weakened enough to crack his eyes and look at them. The boy's eyes immediately widened as he saw what none of the others did, because they were all looking at him. Everything hurt so much that he could barely move, but it would be too late if he just tried to say something. Now it wasn't that he could move, it was that he had to move. Before any of them could move, the small boy who had still been clutching his head in pain sat up and pushed the woman working on him as hard as he could. Tsunade got up quickly, ready to yell at him, when the sight of his blood stopped her cold. He had just pushed her out of the path of the kunai. With what was happening to Naruto, they had all forgotten fifth enemy ninja that had been hiding earlier. Jiraiya was now carrying Tsunade piggyback, while Shizune walked to the right of him slightly behind, holding Tonton, so she could glance at him every few seconds to make sure his hands didn't go where they weren't wanted. Naruto walked to his left, kind of zoned out, but would scan the surrounding area every few seconds to check for enemies. They had been traveling for 2 nights now and they knew Tsunade would wake soon. The entire group feared when that unavoidable moment would happen. Naruto because, well, he did drug her. Jiraiya because he taught the kid and was in on the scam, and Shizune was afraid because of her mentor's violent personality. Plus the fact that she was letting them take her back to Konoha, not that she would stand much of a chance against the Toad Sannin. They had carefully avoided Rain Country, even though it would have saved them some time. Naruto had noticed Jiraiya glance longingly in the direction of his old students, but they both knew they couldn't go there now. That was how Jiraiya died the first time. So until Naruto's body was a bit older, Jiraiya had reluctantly agreed they should keep their distance. Naruto had known when the boy had died there would have been no way to help him. Nagato and Konan though, after all they knew Yahiko was already dead and apparently had been since just a little after Naruto's birth, so even might still be savable, but not until they were stronger. Naruto sighed. There was still so much he had to do. We will help them, Jiraiya Oji, but it won't do them or me any good if you die again. Naruto spoke quietly with a small sad frown when he saw his sensei glance back again. Jiraiya sighed. He knew the kid was right, but he didn't have to like it. I know, Gaki. Come on, one more day and we'll be back in Konoha. Jiraiya changed the subject, trying to lighten the mood. Naruto smirked, but it was gone almost as quick as it appeared, as they all stilled for a moment when they sensed other shinobi close by. They're trying to surround us. Naruto whispered just loud enough for the others to hear. Jiraiya nodded very slightly, as did Shizune, though she was in a bit of shock that such a small boy had sensed out the enemies as quickly as she did. Naruto quickly came up with a plan and whispered to the Sannin and medic, "Follow me, closely, single file, Shizune, cover our back." Then the little blonde put on a burst of speed that left Shizune gaping. She quickly followed though. As the Sannin raced ahead, figuring that if he was confident in the young boy's abilities enough to follow his plan, that she should too. The youngest Toad Sage ever cursed as he felt all 5 of the ninjas still following them. His plan had got them far enough that they weren't going to be ambushed anymore. However, they were still being followed, and now there was a good chance their pursuers knew that they had been found out. Jiraiya smirked at the boy who would once just have called all the enemy ninja out, telling them to come out and fight. Now he was trying to avoid them, though it was smarter. It showed a bit of how his student had grown. Naruto stopped and growled, showing his annoyance. "Alright, that's it. I'll take you all on." Jiraiya's sweat dropped. Hey, then again, maybe he hasn't changed that much, thought the older sage. As Shizune just looked on in fear and disbelief, holding onto her pig that winked at Naruto's display. 4 of the ninja following them came out into the open while one stayed hidden. They think we don't know about the 5th one. So they kept him back, idiots. Naruto thought as he quickly counted them and smirked. Jiraiya and Shizune had stopped a little further ahead, so Naruto was between them and the enemy. Jiraiya didn't really care to play with him and was still holding Tsunade on his back, so he was just leaving it to his student. While Shizune was starting to really worry about the small boy's safety as well as the Toad Sennin's mental health for letting a kid fight what looked like 2 Chonin and 2 Jounin, she hadn't sensed the last one yet. The 4 enemy ninja looked confused at the little blonde boy in front challenging them. Before they could do so much as blink though, the boy seemed to disappear and both of the Chonin in the group fell to the ground out cold. The 2 Jounin jumped back to get some distance from the young boy, which they both felt stupid for, but he did just take down 2 Chonin in 1 second. Jiraiya chuckled at the scene as the 2 Jounin glared at his apprentice. Shizune was in shock, doing a good impression of a fish, gaping. Naruto was just grinning like a Cheshire cat. Finally one of the Jounin spoke, breaking the silent staring contest. "Who are you? You're no normal kid," said the Jounin with black hair. Naruto took on a blank look and blinked and started to gape at him. All the remaining enemy ninja raised an eyebrow at him, even the one hiding in the tree. Then like a dam broke, he burst. "What? You bakas are attacking me and don't even know who I am. What are you, common bandits?" The boy screamed at them, radiating enough killing intent to make them shiver. Though they took offense at the common part, they had been looking for some easy cash. Now they were pretty sure they picked the wrong target, despite the kid's size. Thieves. They're just thieves. I know I shouldn't be complaining, but honestly I'm not even on a mission or a ninja yet. And it's not like I don't have enough problems. I have to deal with idiots too. Naruto thought as he growled low, and calmed himself. Welly, I guess I can let out some pent-up stress on them. They're not wearing any headbands after all. Naruto started to grin at the ill-fated Nukenin, who were deliberating how embarrassing it would be to run away from a kid less than half their size. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at Naruto as Tsunade collapsed. The blonde gave him an innocent expression. "What? Didn't she drug you last time?" Naruto asked without showing much guilt. Jiraiya shrugged and scooped his old teammate up into his arms bridal style. Naruto's eye twitched as he noticed a perverted expression on his sensei's face and saw that his hand was way too far up, like on her ass. The little blonde glared at him and Jiraiya pouted, slowly moving his hand to a more appropriate place. Naruto nodded, satisfied. Then they both left, taking Tsunade out of the gambling house. Jiraiya had found Shizune in a local hotel while Naruto had been conning Tsunade, and that's where they were going to collect the blonde medic's things. They would all be out of town and headed to Konoha before the female Sannin even woke up. With Naruto Kitsune clone, damn it. Naruto thought as he felt his time limit was soon. He knew he only had maybe an hour left. He sighed as he looked down at the girl in his arms. He didn't know how long they had been there, but it had been long enough that the girl wasn't faking sleep anymore. Apparently she was so peaceful and relaxed she actually fell back asleep. Naruto smirked, shaking his head slightly, and tried to imprint her peaceful face on his memory and the moment as well. Then resigned to the inevitable and moved carefully, putting one arm under her knees and moving her back off him so he could put his other hand there to scoop her up into his arms. Hinata stirred slightly and he thought she might wake up, but she soon snuggled into his chest and placed one hand over his heart, holding onto his shirt. The little blonde smiled genuinely at her, a look of content in his eyes. This was what he was fighting for, this moment and everyone like it after. He would protect her this time and everyone else. There was no room for error, he knew that. He held her to him a little tighter, his small body easily supporting her weight, and jumped tree to tree toward the Hyuga compound that was at the edge of the village, as was most clan compounds. It was time to give his old war stealth abilities another test. Naruto grinned to himself. Breaking into the Hyuga compound would be great practice for the future. After all, he did intend to make her his girlfriend in a few years, and what kind of boyfriend would he be if he couldn't sneak through her window to make out with her? As Naruto approached the Hyuga compound from the forest side, he finally caught sight of the wall. It was still early, so he couldn't count on the darkness to hide him. He stopped a good distance from the wall and shifted Hinata closer to him so he could make a few hand signs in front of her. Careful not to wake her, he concentrated his chakra around her too so that the jutsu would cover her as well. Within seconds they were both invisible to the normal eye. One of Jiraiya's old jutsu? Well, not yet, because technically he hadn't made it yet. Regardless, if someone were looking they might see a blur when you moved with it. Because of how it works, it reflects the light around you to make it look like you're not there. If a Hyuga were to active their Byakugan though, they would find you right away. It hadn't been tried against the Sharingan. Naruto jumped up on top of the compound's wall, careful not to make a sound or awake Hinata. He smirked when he saw the guards at the gate only looking toward the outside, while the two guards on the inside were on opposite sides of the main house. Deciding the best path was to the roof, Naruto pushed chakra into his feet and jumped from the tall wall to the main house of the Hyuga clan's roof. The young sage's feet didn't make so much as a squeak. He mentally chuckled at how easy it had been so far. Remembering where Hinata's room had been in the future, he quietly made his way to where her window was, walking right over the guards' heads. The whisker-marked boy let himself fall down from the roof right in front of the window that he hoped was still Hinata's. There were two guards at each end on the house. Luckily the window he needed was mostly in the middle of them. When he hit the ground there was a small scuff sound and he stiffened. The guard that was slightly closer to him turned. Naruto was still in a slight crouch from the drop and carrying a girl almost as big as him, but he didn't move a muscle when he noticed the branch Hyuga member turn. The Hyuga narrowed his eye for a moment. Uh-oh. If he uses the Byakugan, I'm screwed. Naruto thought, not daring to even breathe. Finally the Hyuga's eyes turned back to the front of him. Phew, that was close. Naruto thought, letting out a soundless deep breath. Luckily the window was already half open. The little blonde leaned most of the girl's body weight that was still carrying to one side of his body. Then used his mostly free hand to slide the window open slowly, and without a sound he had climbed in with Hinata and sighed in relief when he saw it was still Hinata's room. He could tell because while the wall were white as everything in the house was supposed to be, the bedspread was a light lavender color, and along with a few other things her mother's old rocking chair was in the corner. Naruto pulled back the bedspread once again, leaning Hinata against him for a free hand, and then tried to lay her down. When he realized he couldn't, he looked to finally notice she was holding onto his shirt still. He smiled softly at her and gently uncurled her figures from him. Then he took her sandals from her feet, putting them on the ground, and covered her. He turned to leave when he heard her mumble, "Naruto-kun." In her sleep. The boy grinned. "Sweet dreams, my Haim." He saw a small smile grace her lips before he went up in a small puff of smoke. With Naruto, Jiraiya, an unconscious Tsunade, and Shizune, and Pig, Gaara smirked at the last sentence, knowing very well what kind of things his friend would do, and that any of those counselors would probably rather be killed by his son than be the target of one of Naruto's harmless pranks. He couldn't help but frown though. This meant he wouldn't be seeing his friend again for a long time. And he'd have to find a way to get letters to Konoha without anyone knowing. Gaara sighed. He'd find a way, Naruto was his best friend and until recently had been his only friend. Gaara. Come on. Temari yelled from the front door downstairs. Gaara quickly put and smiled slightly as he ran down to his sister. Naruto was right, a year ago he'd been alone and something in him hurt so much, but now he had Naruto and his sister and maybe soon even his brother. Let her back into its envelope and stuffed it under his pillow till he could hide it better later. Spotting the ball he'd been looking for, he grabbed it. Naruto Uzumaki had changed his life. He was no longer alone, and little by little that pain he felt was getting smaller. He'd never forget what Naruto did for him, and one day he'd be something great. He'd be someone that could help and protect his friends, because now that was his dream. Meanwhile in Konoha, Naruto stood thinking on top the third's head of the monument about the past few days. He'd got Bachan to stay in Konoha, after some persuasion. His dad told Tsunade that she could put together a Medicinin program like she wanted before and made her head medic in the hospital. She had of course been hesitant and even downright refused for a couple days, but Naruto knew that if one thing could change her mind, it was what brought her back the first time, him. So he decided it was time to use his newest jutsu. Flashback: Naruto was grumbling to himself as he went to the hotel Tsunade was staying for the week because they'd convicted her to stay that long and think about the medic program. As the boy grumbled, a few passerbys caught snippets about how he had to use his new cool jutsu to get the old hag to stay instead of doing something more cool with it. Luckily no one caught much of it and dismissed what they did with him being a kid or in a mood. The little blonde walked right in the door without knocking and screamed just as he used to come to her in the Hokage Tower. "Ba-chan!" he yelled, and Tsunade screamed back what was now becoming reflex. "I'm not hold you damn gaki." Her eye twitching. Naruto grinned cheekily, showing a slightly enlarged canine tooth, but ignored her reaction otherwise. Yeah, come here, I want to show you something," Naruto said innocently, staring up at her. Tsunade eyed him wearily but came closer anyway. "What?" she asked, kneeling down to him curiously. "It's a memory," Naruto answered, sticking a seal on her forehead before she could protest, and put his own forehead against the top of the seal. Making a few hand signs he whispered, "Fuun no Hyburido, Memory Jutsu. Fuun Hybrid, Memory Jutsu," and grabbed the back of her head, holding it to his. As he closed his eyes she couldn't help but do the same. The next thing Tsunade saw was a blonde boy in an orange jumpsuit on a street outside a bar. He looked just like the boy she was just with, but a bit older, and he wore a leaf headband proudly displaying his allegiance. She soon noticed the Naruto she knew was standing beside her watching the scene with her. "What is this?" Tsunade asked as she watched the slightly older Naruto charge a woman that looked a lot like her. The younger Naruto didn't take his eyes off the scene as he answered. "This Bachan is the first time we met." Naruto watched as Tsunade turned to him after she saw her so-called counterpart easily stop the boy and flick him back to where he'd started. "That's impossible, we met just last week and he's older. And this never happened." Even as Tsunade said it, though, she started to sound unsure. Naruto made no attempt to disagree. Matter of fact, he did the opposite. "I know, and it never will. This is only what would have been about 4 years from now if Uro-sennin and me had waited to get you." Naruto spoke quietly, a complete opposite from everything she'd seen from him so far as they both watched the older Naruto get back up and charge the other Tsunade again. Tsunade noted the look of surprise on her counterpart's face when she saw the famed Rasengan forming in the 12-year-old's hand. The other Tsunade reacted quickly though after the jutsu started coming undone. Naruto finally turned his head from the scene to see Tsunade's reaction as her counterpart made the bet similar the one he'd pushed her into just a few days before. The Tsunade by his side watched in a mixture of confusion and shock as her counterpart bet their most treasured possession to the same boy and in almost the same situation she'd done only a few days ago. Once the 12-year-old Naruto accepted the bet, everything went dark for a second before they saw a new scene. Minato stepped over swiftly to where his son was still partially tangled with the scowling elder and scooped the 7-year-old boy up into his arms effortlessly, successfully untangling his son and the elder Koharu, who quickly stood up trying to compose herself. Naruto acted as if she didn't exist as he almost hugged the life out of the Hokage. Normally Naruto tried not to be too clingy even though after a life without anyone to care for him he desperately wanted to. Right now was one of those times he let himself give in to that feeling. After being away from his father longer than he ever had to in his new life, some of those old abandonment issues were getting to him. Throughout his little mission he couldn't help but worry sometimes that when he got back something might have happened and his dad wouldn't be there. Or worse, something he changed in the timeline got his dad killed, so not only would he be alone again but it would be his own fault. The Yondaime dismissed Koharu as politely as he could a few moments later when Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Shizune arrived. Naruto turned his head to grin at all of them but made no move to be put down, and honestly Minato didn't want to put the boy down anyway. He'd missed his son greatly. It was hard to believe the little blonde had only been gone just over a week. Seeing Tsunade reminded Naruto of something. "Dad, look what I got!" Naruto exclaimed happily like any young boy would do. Honestly, if Minato hadn't seen proof of it himself he'd never believe his son had lived almost as long as he had. Naruto pulled on the collar to his shirt and pulled out a necklace with a small blue stone on it. Both of Minato's eyebrows rose as he realized what it was, and he felt a bit of unfounded fear at its legend. "Jiraiya." Minato began looking at his sensei, smiling sweetly. A little too sweetly. "Why is my son wearing a cursed necklace?" he asked. The only thing restraining him from hurting the poor sage was the child in his arms. Said child took pity on his godfather that he just got pounded a few hours ago and spoke up while Jiraiya could still walk. "It's not cursed. And I won it from Tsunade Ba-chan, Dad." Naruto chirped happily, turning to Tsunade while still being held. Tsunade sighed, wished as she caught Naruto's new name for her being said again, and was tempted to whack him in the head despite his cage protector. She settled screaming at him instead. "I'm not old Gaki," she yelled, glaring at him. Naruto just grinned so wide his canines were showing. This was going to be an interesting conversation. Later at the Uchiha compound, Itachi sneaked into his little brother's room late at night as his curiosity got the best of him. He just had to know what his foolish little brother was hiding, and he knew just where to look from earlier when Sasuke pushed whatever it was under his bed. The 14-year-old Uchiha smirked seeing Sasuke sleeping deeply from the doorway and slid in silently. Reaching under the bed he cringed at the sound on the bag he grabbed, crinkling, and looked back up at his sleeping brother quickly. Itachi let out a silent breath when Sasuke didn't stir and pulled the rest of the package out slowly. Opening the paper bag he pulled out a book curiously and read the title. Then reread it, eyes going wider than usual. He looked up at his little brother from his position on the floor and then back to the book he was holding. "Twice." Then he smirked and started laughing silently as he put the book and package back where he found it, not an inch out of place. He got out of Sasuke's room quickly, still smirking like the cat that ate the canary. Got back to his room and went to bed thinking about what he'd found and how long he'd wait before teasing his foolish little brother about it. 1 week later, Tsunagara was looking for a ball to go out and play with Temari when he noticed an envelope on his bed. The little redhead looked around curiously for where it came from but found no clues except that his window was open when he was pretty sure he'd closed it earlier. He picked it up and opened it, wanting to know what it said. It was on his bed, so it must be for him anyway. The 8-year-old's eyes widened as he saw who it was addressed to, and started reading almost eagerly. "Sandman, I'm really sorry but I won't be able to use my clones to play with you for a while, apparently they're dangerous. I sent a normal shadow clone to get this to you but he won't last too long after he gets there. I'll try and write you again soon, but now that your sister knows about me and your seal is fixed, hopefully you already have someone to play with in Suna. If you're able to send me a letter, use our code names, like I am. Your Sandman and I'm Kit. Oh, and if you ever in my village look me up, I won't be hard to find. Just look for where all the weird shit is going down and I'll be right there in the middle of everything." Kit flashback. A 3-year-old Naruto was sitting next to the Hokage's desk playing with some toy toads Jiraiya had gotten him as Minato worked trying to finish up his never-ending paperwork. After a few hours, of course, Naruto got bored with the toys and started whining to go out and play with his best friend Sasuke Uchiha. It was almost lunch anyway, why not? "Okay Naruto, but just an hour, then we have to come back," Minato told his son, but as soon as Naruto heard okay he was off like a shot, and Minato realized too late he was headed for the window and not the door. The older blonde's heart rate shot up as he ran to the open window, fearing the worst. "Naruto!" he screamed and went to jump out the window after the 3-year-old as he spotted his son standing on the ground like nothing happened and wondering why he was yelling. Minato landed on the ground perfectly beside his son and picked him up, hugging the boy so tight he could hardly breathe. Then pulled back and shook the boy by his shoulders. "Don't do that. You could have got hurt," the young father said, still trying to lower his heart rate. The 3-year-old blinked at him innocently. Honestly, it was like the kid was trying to give him gray hair. "Do what?" Naruto asked, looking completely confused. Minato could have face-faulted right there, but thought better of it and carried his son away from all the people that were now staring at them. He never noticed Naruto grimace over his shoulder. "I knew I forgot something." And flashback, yeah. He really should have known his son was hiding something. Well, he did already get a look at the timeline scroll, but that was mostly village events. Soon he would be able to question Jiraiya about his son's first life. Kami, does that sound weird? With Naruto and group, Naruto walked pretty far ahead of Shizune and the two Sannin, mainly because Jiraiya was glaring daggers at him as he limped the rest of the way to Konoha, promising something painful would befall his student. So the 7-year-old time traveler wisely kept his distance. Tsunade still looked a little annoyed but was mostly satisfied from the destruction she'd caused earlier. Shizune had merely sighed at the group's antics as she was quite used to Tsunade's and could remember Jiraiya's quirks from before she left Konoha. Her interest was however caught by the little Bion boy. The apprentice medic never imagined that any kid could be so strong at such a young age. However, Shizune had seen the proof of it with her own eyes as she watched the boy take down a team of rogue ninja by himself almost effortlessly, while using Jounin level ninjutsu and at least mid-Chunin level skill. But the strangest thing was he acted like it was a game. Like the enemies he was facing weren't even a threat to him. Don't get her wrong, the boy seemed to watch his opponents closely as if he knew they could become a threat, but it was almost like he'd face far stronger enemies. Shizune shook her head. She was really letting her thoughts wander. He was strong, but he was still just a boy. The group arrived at the large gates of Konoha within an hour and Naruto practically ran inside, forgetting to make sure Tsunade wasn't going to make a run for it and leaving her with Jiraiya, who was still plotting his revenge on the kid. The slug Sennin shook her head, watching the blonde boy practically fly down the road, disappearing within seconds. Well, she'd come this far, might as well get over with. Jiraiya silently thanked any gods listening that she didn't try and bolt as the group trekked after Naruto towards the Hokage Tower. Naruto ran as fast as he could without using any extra techniques straight for the Hokage Tower, not bothering to go around building. Instead he jumped right over them, running on the rooftops. The villager mostly ignored him or shook their heads amused as they expected Anbu to be chasing him soon for whatever prank they thought he pulled this time. He hadn't, of course, since he'd been gone, but it was a justified assumption. The 7-year-old didn't notice, though he was moving far too fast to care, and within 2 minutes he was running up the side of the Hokage Tower, then jumped right through the open window. Crash, and right into Utatane Koharu of the Elder Council. Naruto groaned quietly, sitting up and looking at the person he'd just knocked down and settling his eyes on his father, who was holding a hand to the top of his head, looking in between amused, annoyed and shocked. Naruto chuckled sheepishly, putting a hand behind his own head in a familiar gesture, his legs still partially tangled with the unfortunate women that had been standing next to the window. "Hey Dad! I'm home!" Naruto shouted happily. Minato couldn't help it. A short bark of laughter escaped him that he quickly suppressed due to Koharu's menacing glare from the floor. But it was official, Naruto Uzumaki Nabekase was back. "Hello Itato," Itachi said behind him, and Sasuke almost jumped out of his skin. "Speak of the devil." The 8-year-old quickly spun around to face his older brother and tried to look as innocent as possible while pushing the package that he just got further under his bed with one foot. Itachi noticed, of course. "Hine-san," Sasuke called, and the older boy gave him a look that said, "I know you're hiding something," but was trying not to smirk at how easily he could read his little brother. Sasuke shifted nervously when Itachi didn't say anything, and there was a silence that was uncomfortable to him. Finally the 14-year-old Danbu decided to give the kid a break. He'd find out what was going on anyway. "Well, mother said that dinner will be done soon, little brother," Itachi told Sasuke as he walked out of the bedroom and into the hall. Sasuke let out a breath and fell back on his bed when his brother was gone. "Who knows what he'd think if he found that book in my room," thought the young black-haired boy. Back with Naruto after a quick breakfast, the group was on their way. Jiraiya and Tsunade in front with Naruto and Shizune holding her portable pig, following close behind. The legendary sucker had agreed to go to Konoha to finish the bet she made but wanted answers, and now looked like the perfect time to get them. "Alright Jiraiya, who is that kid?" Tsunade asked while they jumped tree to tree. Jiraiya rolled his eyes at her bluntness, but really he had been waiting for her to ask. Shizune was too far back to hear, but with his enhanced hearing Naruto heard Tsunade's question easily and was listening in now that he knew they were talking about him. "He is my godson and student, Naruto Namikaze," Jiraiya stated, praying to Kami. His old teammate didn't recognize the name and figure out who the kid's dad was that she is supposed to talk to. When Tsunade immediately put on the brakes, almost slamming face first into a tree, he knew this was going to be troublesome. Naruto on the other hand found it hilariously and made it known as he laughed his ass off, while Shizune was just staring confused since she didn't know what they had been talking about. Tsunade snapped her head around at the sound of the little blonde laughing and glared at him. Shizune had just opened her mouth to ask what was wrong when the legendary sucker started yelling at the 7-year-old. "You tricked me into meeting the Hokage, you little brat," she screamed while stomping over to Naruto. The boy instantly sobered up and stood preparing to run for his life, when he got an idea. An evil, childish, devious idea. He took a quick glance at his mentor, feeling a bit guilty, but looking back to what he was facing, a pissed Tsunade, the feeling of guilt was promptly replaced by his survival instincts, and he swiftly put his plan into action. "He made me," the 7-year-old Naruto shouted, pointing at Jiraiya, whose jaw dropped. Tsunade looked from Naruto to Jiraiya and back, trying to decide who to blame. The Toad Sennin looked pale, but started yelling denials anyway, trying to avoid his fate. When Tsunade looked at Naruto, he was so sad he was sniffling and there were tears in his eyes. The blonde medic's heart melted at the small crying boy. She turned around and went straight for Jiraiya, who screamed like a little girl before trying to flee. He didn't get far. As soon as Tsunade started beating on the white-haired Sennin, Naruto smirked, and wiped the few tears he had cried away from his eyes, thinking, "And the award for Best Actor of the Elemental Nations goes to Naruto Namikaze." Cheers heard in the background. Shizune sighed and shook her head, seeing the whole thing. Crack. Both Sannin apprentices winced hearing the loud crack, followed quickly by Jiraiya screaming. With Kakashi and Minato, Kakashi now stood in the Hokage office in front of his old sensei. He was not worried about Naruto, not yet anyway, he told himself again. He had already looked all over the village looking for the little blonde boy, and the training fields, and the Uchiha districted. Okay, so maybe he was getting a little worried. The masked Jounin took a deep breath to steel his nerves and started to speak. "Minato-sensei, I couldn't find Naruto. Is he out of the village?" Kakashi asked, hoping that his old sensei wouldn't start freaking out, and that Naruto hadn't been kidnapped or something. Minato frowned, thinking, and then blinked, letting out a breath as he realized what must have happened. Looks like Naruto's clone finally dispelled. "Ah, yes Kakashi, Naruto headed out with Jiraiya-sensei a little while ago. Sorry I didn't tell you when you were supposed to look after him today. But they'll be back soon." Minato smirked as he saw his student let out an almost unnoticeable breath of relief. Of course in seconds he was frowning, not that you could really see under his mask. He had been looking all over for that kid just to find out he wasn't even in the village. Minato's sweat dropped as he noticed even through Kakashi's mask. How about I call you when they get back and you can watch him then?" The Hokage tried to placate his annoyed student. Kakashi nodded, and with a puff of smoke he was gone. Minato rolled his eyes and let his head fall on the desk with a thump. He mumbled into his paperwork about none of his ninja using the door. Actually, now that he thought about it, not even his son used the door very often. Naruto grimaced when he came to the next morning. I really got to find a better way than jumping in the way of kunai to save people, he thought as he slowly opened his eyes to see he was in his sleeping bag under a tent, and Jiraiya was staring at him. The 7-year-old immediately made his face look confused and innocent when he couldn't figure out if the Sannin was very lived, angry, annoyed, or some kind of mix. When Jiraiya's eyes narrowed a little, he started leaning toward the latter too. You're not using that clone jutsu again, Jiraiya stated seriously before Naruto could say anything. It wasn't a question. While Naruto saw the logic in the sage's request, he wasn't going to give up that easily. He was still more stubborn than what was probably good for him. His eyes narrowed at his teacher. What do you? Naruto started to yell when Jiraiya moved forward and put his large hand over the boy's mouth before he woke everyone up. The white-haired sage leaned forward so that he was only about half a foot from the boy's face, a classic technique taught to every ninja to make them seem more intimidating, and with his larger form it would work on almost anyone. Naruto just glared. The most powerful Baiju didn't make him back down, but this was one of his precious people, so he didn't move, waiting for an explanation. No. Jiraiya spoke, his voice strong but not unkind. He didn't look angry, it was weird. His face didn't even look mad anymore either. Despite invading his personal space, nothing about Jiraiya's posture said he had any intent to harm his godson. Even as he released the 7-year-old's mouth and put both hands on the boy's shoulders and squeezed them gently before letting go and backing off. Neither male looked at each other, as Jiraiya had already made what he wanted known. He was waiting for the boy to speak. Naruto clenched his jaw. Now it was blatantly obvious even to him that his godfather had been worried. It would have been so easy to just yell no before, but the fact that he now knew his Shizu, godfather and friend, wanted this out of concern, that made it harder. Plus he had never been told no and just listened. If he did, it was because he'd wanted to, or thought it best. It's useful, Naruto said, slowly lifting his head up a little, trying to find a way that the older toad sage would be okay with it. But Jiraiya's next words stopped any excuse he'd come up with. Not if it costs you your life, whispered the Sannin. The blonde boy frowned and sighed after a moment, the fight leaving him, as he realized how very true that statement was. If that clone had dispelled just a bit earlier in the fight, he could have died by the distraction. He didn't look up as he replied. I understand, he said, stronger than he thought he would. The boy felt more than saw his godfather nod before getting up. I'm going to get some breakfast started, said the toad sage as he exited the tent. Naruto sighed again after the older man left. He really did like that jutsu. And now it would be even harder to contact Gaara. With Hinata, the young Hyuga princess woke up early the next morning feeling wonderful. She smiled softly as she sat up in her bed thinking about the dream she had of her crush. Hinata stretched and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. Looking down, she noticed something strange. Why was she still in her training clothes? She thought as her eyes widened. She was wide awake now, and she jumped out of bed to see she was dressed completely in her clothes from the day before, except her feet were bare. At the foot of her bed she spotted her ninja sandals, and her mouth dropped open in shock. She would never have left them there. She always put them by the front door when she came in. Which meant it wasn't a dream. Hinata's brain seemed to shut down for a few seconds, but she didn't faint. By the time her brain seemed to reboot, though, she had a mild blush on her cheeks. She sat down on her bed thinking, oh my god. He was really holding me, and he really put his jacket around me. But then he brought me home. How did he get in? And why didn't I wake up? Wait, forget that. Does this mean he likes me? The 7-year-old was then startled out of her thoughts by her younger sister, Hanabi. Hinata-ne-sama? The younger Hyuga called through the door, knocking lightly. Hinata almost grasped and pulled her cover up around her so if the smaller girl came in she wouldn't be found in dirty training clothes. Yes, I'm Aldo-chan? Hinata asked, making her voice stable despite trying to think of a way to explain her situation if her sister came in. Breakfast will be ready soon, called the younger girl. She was 3 but spoke quite well, though she should. It was practically drilled into her, as with every Hyuga. Hinata released a breath as she heard the small footsteps of her sister moving farther away from her room. With Sasuke, a little 8-year-old Uchiha sighed in relief as he shut the door to his room behind him and hid the package he had gone through so much trouble to get. Maybe I should have gotten Naruto something else, Sasuke thought. He hadn't thought it would be so much trouble for him to buy one of those stupid books, but no, the guy working at the bookshop just had to be a retired shonen and see through his henge. So he had to go all the way to the market that was mostly all civilians and get the book there. At least this time he was smart enough not to hinge into an older version of his 14-year-old brother. Yeah, he hadn't thought that one all the way through, since some could recognize Itachi and think he was trying to get the book. Anyway, the point was he finally got the damn thing and back to his room without being caught by his mother or brother. However, it was almost every day his old memories seemed more distant, like someone else had lived that life, that it hadn't really been him. Naruto would never forget though. He would continue changing this world from the inside out the best he could. Whether or not he made mistakes along the way, he knew every time he saw his father or someone else that had been dead and now lived that he had made the right choice. He just hoped that his good fortune wouldn't leave him in the coming years. Naruto. The boy practically jumped out of his skin at his father's voice. He quickly grabbed his new book Romance for Dummies off the ground and hid it in his jacket, before calling back to his dad. "Yay!" Naruto answered as Minato got close enough to see him from the mountain curve he was climbing. The newly minted 8-year-old tried to look as innocent as ever, praying to whatever deity who hadn't cursed him that there was no bulge showing where the book was. Really, he was caught cuddling with Hinata one time and Atsum just had to find his funny side. He swore if anyone saw him with the book before he got home, he was taking it out on Sasuke. Naruto actually thought it was funny, but then he noticed something it said that would get him in big trouble for having it and his godfather probably kill. It was written by Jiraiya of the Sannin. Of course Sasuke only smirked at that, probably why he bought it in the first place. At least the Tom gave it to him when no one else was around. "Come on. It's almost time for your birthday party," Minato said happily, walling the rest of the way to his son. Naruto smiled brightly and half ran half dragged his dad down the mountain to his 8th birthday party. So far things were looking up. Elsewhere in a dark cave, a man in a black cloak with red clouds and an orange mask was feeling irritated. Things were not going according to his plans and he couldn't figure out why. The man glared out his mask, his anger turning his one visible dark eye blood red. While most the Uchiha ninja were dead, a few survived, and the civilians that survived would breed new warriors into the world. Before even that, though Orochimaru had betrayed him, however, the masked man knew that he would eventually, he just would rather the Inoue snake had been eliminated in the process. Of course those weren't even what had him the most concerned. It was the Yondaime Hokage that was getting to him because somehow he'd survived the attack he made on Konoha with the Kyuubi. The question was, how? And could he do it again? Uchiha Madara sat clenching his jaw and reined in his anger. If things kept going like this, he would need to alter his plans. First though, he needed to know just what, or who was changing the future. "What just happened?" Tsunade asked without looking at the boy at her side, completely transfixed on the battle in front of her of the 3 great Sannin. "You saw what I wanted you to, so I pushed us forward to the day of the bet." Orochimaru and Kabuto interfered. Naruto's eyes narrowed on the snake and his lackey as he watched. Even though she could hardly tear her eyes from the scene, she caught what he said, or rather how he said it, and turned to him. "You say that like it already happened, but it couldn't have. Unless..." Tsunade broke off, turning back to the scene wide-eyed. "Think of everything the boy had said. It's a memory. This Bachan is the first time we met. I know, and it never will. This is only what would have been about 4 years from now if Uro Sennin and me had waited to get you." The words just kept repeating in her mind. What would have happened? It's a memory, the first time we met. There was only one way that it could be true, but it was impossible. It just couldn't be. If possible, Tsunade's eyes got even wider, her mouth opened slightly as she witnessed her counterpart jump in front of the boy who'd fallen protecting her and took a sword through the chest. Tsunade could hardly believe her ears as she watched this other her push Orochimaru back and declare herself the new Yondaime Hokage. She stood slightly as she watched the fight end and her counterpart rushed to heal the boy that had fought for her. Only giving a slight smile as she saw the 12-year-old clutch her counterpart's necklace saying he won. Her counterpart slipped the necklace around the boy's neck and continued healing him. The memory faded to a familiar scene of her counterpart and the 12-year-old Naruto facing off. This time the boy charged at her just as before but made a perfect Rasengan with the help of a clone. Her counterpart took care of him easily though and flipped off his headband again. The boy's eyes were closed tight expecting to be hit again. Tsunade was a little tense expecting the same but her own counterpart surprised not only the 12-year-old Naruto but herself, by kissing the boy's forehead just as she remembered doing to her little brother when she'd first given him her cursed necklace. Tsunade turned to see the younger Naruto she knew for his reaction but was even more confused to see a small almost nostalgic smile on his whiskered face. That's when she knew for sure. This boy as impossible as it seems is one and the same as the older boy they'd been watching. He had lived through what they were seeing, he had once been that boy in the orange jumpsuit. But how? She stared at him as the memory faded and the next time she opened her eyes, they were back in her hotel room. Before she could ask her many questions though the boy let go of her head and backed toward the door almost casually and like he could sense her about to stop him with a question he turned back to her. We really could use you around here Ba-chan. And I'm not letting you give up. Naruto smirked cheekily at her over his shoulder like it was really as simple as that. She raised her eyebrows and shook her head at his behavior but smiled at him anyway. This boy is different, he just might make it. Tsunade thought as she made up her mind. I'm not going anywhere. That didn't mean she couldn't have fun though. Well if I'm staying you'll have to ban ramen. Stated the blonde woman sticking her nose in the air. Naruto's jaw dropped and he immediately attached himself to her leg crying loudly. No, no. Anything but that. Naruto wept as Tsunade tried not to laugh. Really the kid was easy to get to if you knew what to say. Only a few days with him and she already knew his weakness. End flashback. Naruto smirked as the wind blew his hair. It hadn't been too hard to explain to Tsunade. She didn't ask too many questions and seemed to get what was going on even before he started. That wasn't all that happened though. Jiraiya had told his father a bit more about his life than he wanted. It wasn't that he didn't trust his father, he just didn't want his to feel too bad. He looked down at his village and sighed thinking. In the beginning he had been thrilled to have a father but he'd still been angry at him somewhere inside for his first life. He'd showed that by teasing his father about Kyuubi before he was supposed to know, or playing pranks that may have been more centered on embarrassing him. The young blonde sighed. It had been childish and he knew it but that didn't mean he felt any better. He knew though that he would feel much worse if anything ever happened to his father. In his time or world his father may have died and left him alone to face the world but here as far back as he knew his father loved him. Minato would play with him, and spent time with him and even worried about him. So Naruto would try not to blame him, for a life that technically never happened. The small boy stood tall on top the Hokage mountain overlooking the village he'd dedicated his life, love and time to as he thought about all he'd done. Really it had been 8 years today that he started all over, that he'd died, been born, and changed the course of history. Even now though he could hardly believe what he'd done, or how much had changed.